Welcome back, guys, to another Opinion Overhaul podcast. I have Christian here today again.
Hey.
Today we're going to be talking about this whole refugee ban. It's been a big deal. There's been a lot that's happened, so let me catch you guys up. So we all know on the 27th of January, Trump signed this executive order. It was on a Friday. It was entitled Protecting the Nation from Terrorist Attacks by Foreign Nationals. It temporarily suspended the refugee admissions program that Obama had put in place for 120 days, and then banned citizens from entering the country from 7, including Iraq, Iran, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, Syria, and Yemen for a total of 90 days. Green card holders and visa holders were allowed entry after the 29th. On the 30th, Washington's Attorney General began to sue Trump in federal court, and then on the 3rd, the ban was officially suspended. On the 9th, they went back to court, and the government failed to get the ban resuspended. Trump then tweets, "See you guys in court."
All caps.
All caps, completely typical. Sad. Now, there's really two directions from this point that he could go in, where he either completely redoes the travel ban, or he goes to Supreme Court. Now, it looks like he's going to do both. So next week, he says he's going to come out with a new ban.
Right.
But he still plans to go to Supreme Court. Now, I think the new ban that he's putting out is more of a temporary implementation, just so that he has some sort of ban in place. I don't really think it's a compromise between him and the people. It's just,
I think the idea is
in
to
the
give
meantime.
The idea behind it, from what I've read, is to give it a stronger legal basis, so that it's not as easily challenged.
Yeah. Now there was tons of issues around it. It was a bad execution. But today we're specifically going to talk about the legality and the implications of it on a world stage. Now, to start us off, Christian, the biggest issue with this whole ban, that in the eyes of most people, was that it was sort of linked to the Islamic faith. Now, do you think it's hard to distinguish between the Islamic faith and these countries? Because in the Middle East, it's sort of become indistinguishable, this idea of religion. Religion has made the culture. For instance, the entire of the West is based on the monotheistic Judaism and Christianity. Middle East is primarily Islam, and then you have Jainism and Hinduism and Buddhism.
So what you're saying is that even if you're not religious, you have the religious ideology already within you.
Well, and 90% of Syrians are Muslim.
Right.
Exactly.
Okay.
So do you think it becomes indistinguishable? And no matter what Trump had done, banning somebody from these countries, it's gonna have backlash, and there's gonna be that whole connotation of a Muslim ban.
Right. So that's a really good point. That even if you're not filtering by religion per se, that filtering by regions which happen to be heavily religious, or have been, or even currently are, you're still in effect barring people based off a certain ideology. So even if it's not by religion, but it's by a region that happens to be religious, you're barring the ideology, regardless of what you believe or not. So I do think that's a really good point. That feeds a lot into the legal justification behind this ban. So the way I see it is that while the president does have extremely powerful and far-reaching power when it comes to immigration, it is limited. It is limited in the cases when the ban or any potential action on the topic of immigration is unconstitutional.
So do you think it wasn't unconstitutional to ban?
Right, so this is a really good, interesting way of arguing the case. So, in my opinion, the only way that you can say that this ban is not okay is if it's unconstitutional. Now, what does it matter if it's unconstitutional or not? Does the Constitution only apply to U.S. citizens or not? How does that work? Now, there's actually been court cases in the past that have extended the idea of what it means to be unconstitutional to not just U.S. citizens, but to anyone affected by the U.S. government's power. I believe the court case was, I'm going to butcher this name, but it's Boumediene v. Bush. So this was a court case a couple years back that essentially extended the rights of a U.S. citizen, the rights from the Bill of Rights and all the U.S. Constitution, onto anyone affected. And the court case arose because someone in Guantanamo Bay thought that he was not receiving due process, which is a violation of, I believe, the 14th Amendment. And it went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the guy won. If you are not a U.S. citizen, you still deserve the protections that the U.S. Constitution has. So the question now shifts to is it unconstitutional? Is it unconstitutional to what parts of the Constitution does it violate, if any at all? Now, the U.S. Constitution explicitly states that you cannot discriminate on the basis of religion. So if you can find that this is discriminatory on the basis of religion, then you can say it's unconstitutional, and because the Constitution applies to non-citizens as well, based off of the precedents from this court case, then it means it is not legal.
Now, this is sort of where my question came in. Do you think that Islam has now become a culture? So I know that the Constitution says this, and the 14th Amendment specifically says, I think they refer to citizens and persons, so it includes everyone. And you said you won that case, right?
The court case, regardless of the wording of the Constitution, this court case from the Supreme Court establishes this as law of the land.
Okay, and anything really in the Supreme Court, it just becomes law in that.
Right,
in that
it's a branch of government.
So, do you think now that if somebody went to court today, they could argue this whole idea that Islam has become that Islam is so integrated into the Middle Eastern culture that it has become not even a nationality, it's just become an identity? Do you think that anywhere in the Constitution does it refer to nationality that you're allowed to discriminate against that in such a way?
I'm not 100% sure on that, so I couldn't answer on a factual basis. But from, I guess, the principle behind the question is, can you discriminate at all?
Yeah.
And the answer is a resounding no. You can't discriminate at all. Now, in the cases where there's national security on the line, you can discriminate against people like criminals or suspected terrorists, and you can throw these guys into prison and then give them due process, all that stuff. So you can discriminate in some degree, but you cannot discriminate on the level that this immigration ban is putting out there.
Okay. Now, I get that. Now, if you completely throw the Constitution aside, and because everyone in America sort of thinks that the Constitution is infallible, let's for the sake of argument, let's say it is fallible. Do you think that, for instance, anybody... Okay, let me word it a different way. Modern terrorism, most people associate with having a Middle Eastern influence or an Islamic influence.
Right.
Do you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Now so many people are going to complain and say that anybody can be a terrorist.
Yeah, actually, I think we should throw a caveat onto that. Terrorism is not exclusive to the Islamic faith. It's not exclusive to people of that region. There is far more terrorism coming from radical right-wing terrorism that's domestic. Hell, even a lot of the ISIS attacks that have happened, or people who have pledged allegiance to ISIS, were not people that were immigrants from those regions, or from any region, as a matter of fact. For example, in all of the cases where there's been very, what's the word? Important, I guess you could call it, terrorist attacks in the past few years, have been San Bernardino. One of them was an American citizen. The other one was a Pakistani citizen. This was not... Pakistan is not barred. In the New York and New Jersey explosions, these guys were born in Afghanistan. Afghanistan is not barred. You can go the Orlando Pulse nightclub shooting, American citizen, Boston bomber. These guys were not from the region that is banned. So the point I'm trying to make is that terrorism is not exclusive just to A, the region that's banned, B, the Islamic faith, or C, non-U.S. citizens. However, if you want to find out what is the common feature amongst all these ISIS-related terrorist attacks, unfortunately, it's the Islamic faith.
Now, and most of the San Bernardino, I think he was Pakistani, and all those places, they did have some, even if it was marginal, some Middle Eastern influence, whether it was their heritage or whatever. Because now, even if you dismiss that, if you go up to some random person in America and ask them, name a terrorist, they're gonna name some person with the Islamic faith that is or if you give
their idea of a terrorist is the Islamic.
If you give a person a lineup and one guy's wearing a turban, most of the time they're going to pick the guy with the turban that looks like he's from the Middle East.
Yeah, which one do they? If you ask them who do you think's a terrorist, it's going to be the most.
We hate stereotypes, but it's just human nature. A lot of people do it. I'm not saying it's a good thing, but it's a thing people do. Now, from that, this whole idea of the refugee ban and this extreme vetting, if you could tell the person that was going to attack your family, blow up your friends, if the one feature that they could have, you could distinguish, would you vet those people more? Let me put it in a different light. You know where I'm sort of going with this? If you were on the street and you were in Detroit and you saw somebody with a red handkerchief hanging out of their back pocket and it was red,
mm-hmm.
would you be more likely to run away from them?
Yeah, if you think he's a blood.
Would you call the police on them?
Well, is he
if there was a policeman over, would you flag him down?
I mean, if there was an attack, yeah, I'd say that's
or,
the guy that's
or if
likely
you
to
felt
do
in
it.
danger, would you call the police if you were walking down the street at night and there was a bunch of them following you? Or
Oh, yeah, okay, in the case where they're following me. But I think what you're getting at here is that the common characteristic amongst all these Middle Eastern terrorists is the Islamic faith.
No, I'm saying a turban, for instance. Just
right,
one...
Okay, so features of the Islamic faith.
I'm saying if some guy walks into it with a turban, now that's pretty close to the Islamic faith. It doesn't exactly mean the Middle East. I mean, tons of North Africa, they still wear turbans. It's still Islam. I think we sort of more targeted the Middle East, even though he's sort of thrown in Somalia and Libya into the mix in his ban. I'm just saying, if you could discern... I know it's like something like 1.3, 1.6 billion people in the world are Muslim, but if it was more likely that one of those 1.6 billion were to be Muslims were to be terrorists, do you think they should be vetted more, whether it's constitutional or not, from your perspective? What do you think?
I think that if you want to change how we vet for immigrants or visa holders or refugees, and you want to say, hey, take an extra look at people from this region, fine. I see no problem with that. It's like if you're at an airport and you see an old lady walking by, you're not going to pay extra attention to her because she's statistically and realistically and pragmatically not going to be the one to put your lives in danger. So if you want to say, hey, whatever government organization is in charge of the vetting process, pay more attention to people coming from Syria, absolutely. That's just a common sense, pragmatic approach. But once you start barring people from those regions, that's not okay. But from a strictly legal perspective, because I want to get the legality of this down, the only way that you can... The circumstances that would have to be met for this ban to be called illegal are primarily if you find it's unconstitutional. And what would make it unconstitutional? If it bars against a certain religion in this particular case. Does it bar against a certain religion? That's the key question.
I don't think it does.
But here's the perspective I'm taking on this. Somewhere upwards of 80% of all Muslim migrants come from these regions. So Trump is barring roughly 80% of Muslim migrants. So he's a clear target on the Muslim faith, Muslim grouping at least.
I have to disagree with you here. I feel that out of these 7 countries, only, and out of the 1.3 billion Muslims, I think it's only like 15% of the entire Muslim population is being affected. Think about it, you have to think of all of Malaysia. North Africa, some of North Africa.
But the thing is, just because you're not barring all the Muslims does not mean you're not trying to ban Muslims in general. Because here's the thing, you could say there's a billion Muslims out there, but let's say all of the Muslims that come into the country come from, these 10 countries, right? If you start barring those 10 countries, you're effectively barring all the countries that send Muslims into your borders. So you're barring all Muslims that enter into your borders, or at least the vast majority. So you can say, yeah, a billion of Muslims come from region X, and we're only barring region Y. But region Y is where all the Muslims who enter the country come from, then you're barring Muslims.
The only evidence I've even seen for this, nowhere in the actual ban does it say anything. I don't think it mentions religion even once.
No, it does, actually. This is a really interesting point. The executive order explicitly says that they are going to, and I quote, prioritize refugee claims made by individuals on the basis of religious-based persecution, provided that the religion of the individual is a minority religion in the region. Now, it goes without saying that these 7 nations banned are Muslim majority, which means, based off of the wording of this executive order, the minorities, i.e. the non-Muslim the non-Muslim individuals who want to claim refugee status, get priority. So you are de facto discriminating based off of faith.
So you're saying a Christian is given priority to be let into the U.S.?
Yes. It says that not only not Christian, it says minority, but minority
is this an amendment to his ban, or is it an actual original?
No, it's in the actual executive order itself. Right, so, and on top of, even if it wasn't, you have a very strong case to prove the intention behind the law is motivated by the intent to ban Muslims because of what Trump has said in the past. He said in an interview with, I forget who, might have been CNN or Fox or one of the cable news organizations, that he fully intends to give priority to Christian people of the Christian faith.
I did see that. And that's his one mistake, is where if you leave one little tiny crack in this whole thing, the whole thing can fall down. And he did leave that crack, but I can't see in any way how anyone could think that Trump's intention is to ban Muslims. If he wanted to ban as many Muslims as possible, he could have swept the entire Middle East out of the picture. He could have just...
No, but you don't have to. You don't have to ban all of the Muslim countries to effectively ban all of Muslim immigration.
Why didn't you ban Afghanistan, Nigeria?
Okay, why he didn't ban Afghanistan and Pakistan and Saudi Arabia is beyond me.
Saudi Arabia...
I've heard reports from Washington Post that he has connections in at least business ties in at least Pakistan and Saudi Arabia. I don't know about Afghanistan, so that's questionable. But the fact of the matter is, you do not have to ban all 50-plus Muslim majority countries to ban 80-plus% of all the Muslims who enter into the countries. Into the United States. So if all of the Muslims, and of course it's not all, it's like 80-plus%, if most of the Muslims that enter into the States come from a select region of, let's call it 10 countries, because we're going to throw in Afghanistan on that list, etc. If the majority of Muslims come from those 10 countries, that enter into the United States come from those 10 countries, and you ban those 10 countries from sending people over, then you are banning Muslim immigration.
What's wrong with that argument is really that you're not even... Number one, the whole thing's temporary. He's done it into this case so that the government can grab control of the immigration thing. Obama, it's up to the government... Okay, let me frame it like this. The government has the right to constrict immigration.
Yeah, that's
Obama's done it.
Yes.
Bush has done it. Everyone has done it.
We've had immigration quotas since the 1920s.
Obama reduced immigration from, I think it was by close to 70% back in, I think it was 2012. And if Trump's deciding to constrict that all the way, I don't see the issue with that. That one little section of the executive order, I do see that's a huge chink in the armor and a huge chink in this argument. But if he wanted to ban Muslims, he could have put it straight through a Muslim test. I don't know how you would do that. And that would be blatantly a ban of the Muslims. If he really wanted to stop terrorism in the sense of banning Muslims, there's hundreds of different ways he could have done it.
There's more direct routes, is what you're getting at.
Exactly. And if that was the case, we would be in a dictatorship. Mm-hmm. Trump could go around swooping up Muslim communities and just grabbing people off the street.
Yeah.
And maybe he's done it in such a way where it's so slight, the idea of a Muslim ban, that he can get away with it. Maybe that's the only way he can get away with it. I can see your side on that.
See, here's where I'm taking issue. I get the argument that if you wanted to ban Muslims, there was far more direct routes to doing it. You could somehow devise a completely impractical test that would test for your Muslim faith. Or you could ban all Muslim countries. But that's very on the nose. That's clear. This is a Muslim ban, right? Trump's not stupid. If you frame this as a national security issue, then there's no justification for banning 50-plus countries that are no threat to us. So if he goes, wait, hold on a second. If I just ban these 7, no one's going to question my motives as much as if they were as much as they would if I were to ban 50-plus countries that happen to all be Muslim, majority. If I just ban these 7 countries, I can claim this as a national security issue. And all of a sudden, it looks far more feasible. But the 7-country ban is a way of banning the majority of Muslim immigration from into the country of the United States, while also appearing to be a ban for the purpose of national security rather than for the purpose of barring Muslims.
Now, I can see where you're coming from on that. If Trump was really intentionally... I think he's trying to protect the people. I disagree with a lot of his stuff, but I honestly think that he's taking this approach to help the people. And his whole perspective on it is, if one of those million refugees that the Obama administration, the Bush administration, Reagan have let in since then, if one of those people has committed a terrorist attack, they've done wrong. The president has done wrong by the American people. Now, I think that there's a high potential for that to be the case. And we're saying Trump's smart. ISIS is smart.
Mm-hmm.
ISIS has single-handedly started from nothing to 2 years become this worldwide terrorist organization.
Right.
Worth billions of dollars. They've taken...
They have oil fields, they have tanks.
They've created their own economy.
Slave-based economy. But...
Now...
No, I get it. They're smart. They can infiltrate the system.
And they will. And now, I don't think they're recruiting white guys out the yin yang. I'm sure there's some white guys there. I'm sure there's some black guys there. And don't get me wrong, I love people from the Middle East. We got a lot of them here at McGill. They are the coolest people.
Yeah, no, they're great people.
They make great food. Their parents make great food.
Oh my God.
Boostons, that is the best. Shout out to Boostons, sponsor the podcast.
So it's not. You're saying it's not a slight against Muslims. It's he truly believes that this is for the sake of.
He wants to protect the gay people, the lesbian people, the Muslims that are legally in our country.
He wants to protect Americans.
He wants to protect America. Okay. I don't think he has a drop of racism in him. In maybe some of the old timey stuff, he might disagree with black people a little bit.
He's grandparent racist, is what you're saying.
He's grandparent racist, but and I'm sure my grandparents are a little racist.
My grandparents are super racist, but it's like you can't really hold it against them.
And it's not aggravated racism at this point. They've been exposed to this one, and the guy is 70 years old. He's the oldest president to be elected. Wow.
But it sounds like what you're getting at is that it's not racially motivated.
It's not. If you go to court, you can testify that this guy is not a racist by any means, especially directed towards Muslims. This is entirely motivated by helping the American people. I don't think it has an ounce of racism, an ounce of... If it was safe, I think the guy would want as many Syrians in this country as possible.
Okay, I get what you're getting. At. Now, there's a couple of issues. The first is he has repeatedly campaigned on a Muslim ban. So his intention...
He has used the word Muslim ban. I'll give you that.
Multiple times. I mean, the intention is clear. Now, you're submitting that essentially he's not doing this on a basis of racism. He's not a racist guy.
And it is an executive order. It's directed specifically at him. It's by the Trump administration the executive order is carried out.
Right.
So you can make the argument specifically in ties to Trump, right?
No, that's what I'm saying. Okay, we're talking about Trump here. We're not talking about an administration. We're talking about the man. So not only has he campaigned on this being a Muslim ban in the past, but the argument that he's not racist and he doesn't have anything against Muslims and his priority is national security, that's fine. I can accept that. I mean, he said some extremely questionable things in the past. Extremely questionable things. But where I take issue is, even if his motivation is purely national security based, his interest is solely in protecting the American people, if the means at which you do it are not only illegal, like I believe they are, but immoral, like we'll get to later, then that's where I take the issue. The second you cross those two boundaries, especially the latter, the immorality aspect, that's when I'll take a problem with it. Now, you can say his motivation was national security based. Fine, I can accept that. You can make a very reasonable case about that, or at least you cannot make a very strong case against it. But even if that was his intention, if the means at which he's trying to accomplish that are discriminatory and bar based off of religion or indirectly based off of religion, that's where I draw the line. That's where it's not okay.
Okay, so your thoughts summed up about the legal... Is this legal? Is the ban legal?
Okay.
Not if it's right. Is it legal by American standards? Okay. Let's ignore the whole UN international standards.
Okay. All right. So is it legal? So my answer would be no. And the train of thought goes like this. It's not legal because it's not constitutional. It's not constitutional because it violates the 14th and 5th Amendment about due process and equal protection under the law. And this ban does not offer equal protection under the law and due process because... A, the Constitution applies to non-citizens according to that court case we mentioned earlier, and B, these non-U.S. citizens, the people from the region, are not being given the protection of the Constitution because they are being barred based off religion. How do I know they're being barred based off religion? Because not only has he made his intention clear in the past, not only has he about this being a Muslim ban, not only has he said he was going to give priority to Christians. Not only does the executive order state that he's giving priority to non-majority religions, which is basically everything but the Muslim religion, but from a purely pragmatic statistical perspective, it bars 80% plus of the Muslim refugees that enter into our country. So even if that wasn't his intention, the fact of the matter is it's unconstitutional because it discriminates based off of faith. And that is an issue because the Constitution, as we have said earlier, does apply to non-U.S. citizens, therefore it's illegal.
Now, my thoughts on the whole thing is that I think majorly the government is completely within its rights to do this. Now, other than the fact that he has made his intentions clear before, he has called it a Muslim ban. He once went straight out and just said, I want to ban all Muslims from entering the country. He specifically said that. And that's the chink in the armor. And that one thing that you said earlier about where they were specifically giving priority to Christians entering the country from those countries. Now, if it weren't for those, I think the government's completely within its right. We've done this so many times before. We've done deportation. Now, there's not specific historical evidence on the whole whether or not immigration from the Middle East to the U.S. is a good thing and it would cause irreparable harm to us. But I think the government's completely within its rights to constrict the flow. And if that's completely constrict the flow of refugees, I think they're still completely within its rights. Whether that's immoral or not, we'll get to that right now. Now, Christian, we can, because we're looking at this objectively, we can completely separate whether it's legal or not and whether it's moral or not. Right. Now, it sort of gets into the questions before where I was talking about your personal perspective on it. Socially, how do you feel? Do you feel that the argument that they're carrying in court that this is causing irreparable harm to the communities of America and international communities, do you think that's a valid point?
So I think this goes to a lot of what European nations a lot of populist parties within European nations were saying about accepting refugees in general, which is if you accept far too many of these refugees, their culture is not compatible with ours, it destroys our culture, it does not mingle with ours, they are not assimilating, therefore we should not let in so many people. That sounds very xenophobic, very nationalist. But I have to admit, I do understand a little bit and agree with at least some portion of what they're saying. I don't think you should accept millions upon millions upon millions of immigrants because you do have to keep into consideration that sometimes cultures are just not compatible. If you come from a region that is oppressive towards women, that supports male dominance, that is completely intolerant of other religions, and you let people of that culture, not saying all of them are necessarily like that, but you let people who generally come from a culture that supports those values into a liberal democracy, liberal in the classical sense, in that we preach tolerance or toleration and equality and whatever your gender, your sex, whatever. If you let a lot of people with incompatible cultures into a culture that preaches the opposite, you will have issues. But that does not mean you should bar all of them. It means you should do it within moderation.
Now, how can you put a number on that, though? What is the number that you can say where it's... And over a bunch of years, it will accumulate. Even if you say, I'm going to let 5,000 in right now, 50 years from now, that number is going to be huge. And it's not like they come to the country and then leave, where it's like a lot of Mexican immigration where it's sort of cyclical.
Right.
If you're bringing a refugee over, it's not like you're going to keep them there until the region's stabilized, which it will never be in the foreseeable future.
Right, okay.
They're going to be staying in America. Now, every single person from that region that I've met, they've been the coolest people, and they seem to assimilate perfectly into our culture. Now, Canada has a more accepting culture. I'm sure it would be different if you went to a high school in Alabama or something.
Right, yeah, for sure.
And then, let's say if somebody was specifically bullied for their religion and or ethnicity, which I'm sure in Alabama could happen.
Yes, true.
Okay, it will happen to some degree or another. I can see some hatred being built up there, and that assimilation wouldn't really happen. Everything that I've seen in Canada has worked pretty well so far. Now, if you get those proportions and you scale them up entirely, I can see that issue arising. But drawing a line, that's where this whole thing...
How do you draw the line? Is that what you're getting at?
Is there a line you can even draw? Yeah. Because when does it become moral to draw the line?
Right, okay. I think it becomes moral if you can make a strong argument that Western liberal democracy preaches strong values, which are, there's two fundamental pillars of a Western democracy, which is freedom and equality, liberty and equality, all of those two. If you can make a strong case that those two values ought to be the values we have, they are the objectively correct, or at least some of the objectively correct values we should hold, and you have the potential to ruin those values by letting in far too many immigrants, then I can say you can morally draw the line. at the point where it no longer puts those two pillars of freedom and equality in jeopardy. Now, how do you draw that line? And I think the answer is primarily look to the past. The U.S. has let in millions of immigrants in the past. I mean, look at...
But they've been from similar cultures, though. It's not... They speak different languages and stuff, but it's still sort of the Judaistic, Catholic, Roman Catholic sort of backbone that they've had. Now, there's very little history on the immigration from the Middle East. The only thing that we've even seen about that is immigration to Europe, and that's ended disastrously so far. Now, the influx is pretty high.
I'm sorry, what happened? You're saying it has ended disastrously? Immigration from Europe to the States?
No. From Syria into Europe. In Germany and everything. We can't agree on that?
I don't know. I don't think we can. I don't think it's been a disaster. I think this is a clear product of... the idea that it's been a disaster in this country is a clear product of the media.
Don't you think, though, that they've fallen right into the trap that you've said that they haven't been able to draw that line where it's okay? You were talking earlier about how they've assimilated and that their things don't really match.
Right.
Their personalities don't really match.
You see issues coming up in Germany with, refugees are groping women and, there's been reports of rape and stuff like that. Well, first, I do think that is a clear parallel to the race issues in the United States, where I think it is far and beyond reason blown out of proportion. I can accept that there's some issue there. So if you want to say, hey, we shouldn't be Germany, we shouldn't accept that many people, I'd say fine. You're probably not that far off the mark there. But how do you find the right mark? You made a great point. I have to admit, you've made a great point that saying all of the millions of immigrants we've accepted in the past, most of them have been from Western liberal democracies, and that is a great point. We've never had to. Well, we have, but I'll get to that later. We've never, in large part, had to deal with accepting millions of millions of immigrants from non-Western liberal democracy countries. But we have accepted many, many Chinese and Japanese immigrants.
But they're completely different. That's Jainism, that's Buddhism. They're completely separate. I know Islam is a monotheistic religion in the sense where we all sort of come from the same point, the Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. But then there's that whole other branch of the far East Asia that's been completely raised in a different sector. And now in America, the highest paid people per capita is the Chinese people. They're getting paid more than the average white person in the U.S.
Right, but I think to go back, are you saying that looking towards the Chinese and Japanese immigration in the States is not a good reference because their cultural values line up more with the Western liberal democracies than the Middle Eastern cultural values?
I don't think they... Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I don't think they line up at all because there's no...
Wait, who doesn't line up at all?
That Islam and East Asia can be similar at all.
But I want to make this clear for our listeners. You're saying that the values of the Middle East, the Middle Eastern culture,
yes,
does not align with the United States or the Western liberal democracy values, right?
Yes.
And the second point is that Eastern, like China and Japan and South Korea and all that, their values line up much more with Western liberal democracy values.
Exactly. India's sort of a middle ground there. There's some extreme aspects of the Indian culture that sort of align with Sharia law. Other than that, I can't... I think they have to be separated.
Okay, that's a really great point, actually. And I think the point of this podcast is that I'm a little convinced in that we should not be looking towards previous quotas or previous levels of immigration in the past for guidance on how we should set the quota in the future, because we only have two ways of looking at this. We have the Western liberal democracies; they already line up with our values, and the second is you have Far Eastern Asian countries, and their values, while not exactly the same, in fact, in a lot of aspects, they're the opposite of our values, but not in regards to upholding liberty, equality, and all that stuff. So their values line up much more with the values of the United States than people from the Middle East. Therefore, the argument goes, we should not accept that levels of that. We should not accept similar levels of Muslim, the Muslim region, the Middle East, essentially.
Okay.
We should not accept similar numbers from the Middle East because their values are not the same as they were in the past with Germany and England and all that.
Yeah.
I get that. I'm on board with that, to be honest. Now, how do you draw the line in the sand? Where's the demarcation? I think you start low and work your way up. Now,
experiment with it.
Yes, I think you. So here's the way. This might be a little far. This analogy, but after Prohibition, the way that the U.S. government drove bootleggers out of business was that they had near zero tax on alcohol. So they undercut all the bootleggers. If they weren't undercutting them, at least you knew that the alcohol was coming from a legally certified area where you can buy this alcohol and it's safe. And so because of the combination of the cheap price and the safety behind it, bootleggers were wiped out. And so after they were wiped out, they slowly raised the tax to where we have it now. Now what I'm saying is the analogy is start low and work your way up. Now you're not driving bootleggers out of business, so that's where the analogy falls apart. But what I'm trying to get at is you can start at a lower level and work your way up slowly. But the important point to draw is that you're not starting at zero.
Okay, well, I guess if you start at zero, there's no way really to begin because you don't really have a comparison. Because the whole point you're trying to make is you start really small, you work your way up until you reach a certain point that you find a good point where the morale, if you look at it from an outside perspective, you're keeping America safe and you're keeping America culture and traditions intact while still helping and making the people that are immigrating their lives better. You're allowing them to immigrate. Yeah. So you're saying you need to draw the line between keeping America safe and allowing immigrants that have a poor situation in their country that they're immigrating from, right? And I can come on board with that. So you start small, you work big. Therefore, you're eliminating the whole issue of risk. So you're and what I mean is you're starting small, working big, and you see where the sweet spot is. If you just started big, there'd be a lot of risk there. You wouldn't know. We have no historical significance. So I can get on board with that. You start small, you work your way up big. I can get on board with that.
Now, I think a really key factor to mention here is the single best way to make sure that people of different cultures assimilate. And again, this is predicated on the fact that we think Western democracy has the best, or at least a desirable culture. Things that individuality, liberty, freedom, all that stuff. Predicated on the fact that we want to maximize those values, the best way to get people of different, potentially harmful values to assimilate to values that we hold, or at least close enough. Diversity has its place, but within reason, of course. The best way to get these diverse opinions to not be radical, but to be within the realm of reason, is education. So the goal should be, when you have an immigrant or a refugee coming in, and they have kids, or they're under the age of 18, you have to make it a clear goal that the idea, the best way to get these guys to swim in your culture, the thing that we should be focusing on probably the most is getting these guys educated.
In what way? In making sure they can speak English, or?
I'm not even concerned about the... So people
are you saying educate the refugees or educate the population that these people are okay?
No, the refugees. Make sure that the kids coming in this country are thrown in a great school system.
Okay, so I can see what you're saying. Like the whole issue why black culture is the way it is today is because we started them off in a rut where slavery was a thing and no one helped them out. Right. We don't want to create a minority that's sort of sucking off. We want them to assimilate and be a thriving part of our culture, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, I can get on board with that. To sum this up, is immigration, specifically from the Middle East, a good thing or a bad thing? Go.
Good thing or a bad thing? Good or bad in relative to what? I think is the important question. Relative to the United States, I would they're two separate.
Worldview. You can.
If you want to be like a utilitarian and total up all the good and maximize that, I mean, you can do that, but let's be a little pragmatic about it. I think you have to do it in regards to what perspective, to whom is the good being distributed. And so I think you can take two perspectives. First is in regards to the United States, which is, I think, the question more people would be interested in having answered. I would say that's a tough question to answer. It's a very tough question to answer.
That's why I asked it.
I lean more towards yes, because we have many academics that are currently barred because of this immigration ban that cannot come into the country, or have fear. For example, I have a lot of Pakistani friends who think that their country's going to be next, and they very may well be. We don't know what Trump's going to do next. He said he might add to the list a couple countries. He's going to do his second immigration ban that he's been talking about for a couple of days now. We don't know. So in regards to how does the U.S. benefit, the U.S. does benefit from immigration because you look at academia, you look at unskilled labor on both sides, the high and the lows of educational work based on education, that is, and they're not filled with Americans. Go to any academic institution in the States, and your professor is probably from India. Your professor is probably from China. The most brilliant minds tend to be the immigrants, and they come here for because we have the money and all that. But the fact of the matter is, the U.S. benefits dramatically from the immigrants. Now, on the low level, like the low skill level, the people doing the farm work and the manual labor, those tend to be the immigrants too. Now, they do tend to be from Latin America and Mexico, but the immigrants from the Islamic region, the Middle East, are still doing, in a large part, the manual labor with like the, I don't want to say low class labor, but I think you know what I'm getting at when I imply that. They definitely add tremendously to the economy. But the downside is you have to pay for these schooling systems. You have these you have to provide services and benefits to all these new immigrants, and that is a downside. From a objective perspective, that is a downside. But I do think the gains outweigh the detriment. Now, from the immigrants' perspective, obviously it's a good thing, but it's more than that, because these, at least in regards to Syria, these are refugees. You can't tell me that, yeah, the government has an obligation or a duty to prioritize its citizens. Yeah, I get that to a large degree, but at the same time, we as people, as human beings, have a duty and a priority to help out others, especially when we're in the position to do so, which the States, by far, is the best country that can help out people that are less fortunate. And when we're talking less fortunate, I'm not talking someone from Ethiopia who barely has much. I'm talking people in a war-torn region who their homes were collapsed, their daughters are kidnapped by ISIS, their son was shot in front of them and potentially crucified, and they're trying to flee Aleppo, but ISIS is boxing them. Those are the kinds of people that we're talking about here. And if you have the ability to help them out, at least in a small part, then you ought to. And I get that there are some detriments. You have to pay for that. Who's paying for it? Do we have all the room? Can we accept that many people? No, we can't accept so many people. No, we can't pay for that many people, but we can pay for some. So the notion that we should ban indefinitely all refugees from Syria is a human rights violation, in my book. So is it immoral? Yes. Is there some degree of truth in the fact that we should limit it? Yes. But there's a compromise to be made, and we should start out relatively small and work our way up. But we should start at a non-zero point.
Okay. I agree, but I disagree. Now, here's my take on the whole thing. I have no issue with people coming to our country. I say I'm a Canadian, but I have absolutely no issue with it. And I have no issue with paying a little more tax so that these people can get a good education, get good housing. I have no issue with that. There's so many stories where these people become doctors, save lives. These are great people. These are people that have gone through so much in life, and I have no issue with helping them out. Now, that does not mean that I disagree with Trump, because even though Trump said worldwide Muslim ban, I don't think the guy by any means specifically hates Muslims. I think he more used that to his advantage to get a certain crowd in the U.S. to agree with him. The guy's not an idiot. He knows that if he went out and said that, he would be on every news station, everyone would listen to him, and a lot of people in America would agree with him. Now, if this ban, let's say, was an indefinite ban, I would have an issue with it, because that's just completely shutting us off to the world. And I think that you can assimilate the idea of an American life and a person from Syria. Now, I think those can be the exact same thing. A person in America should want to help somebody on the outside. But what Trump's done, he's made a temporary ban because the entire world's gone up in flames in the past 2 years. 2 years ago, ISIS was this little small thing, and then Obama decided to completely pull out from the Middle East, and then they were created in the vacuum. This ban, the safest way to make more people able to immigrate to the U.S. in the future is to not rush to it. If you take your time and objectively look at what the issue is, and take people in slowly and gradually when you're ready, so that there isn't ISIS infiltrating the U.S. By doing that, you're making sure that American lives are safe, but the people coming from the Middle East are safe as well. Because more people can come to the U.S. if every single American thinks of a person in this situation as a victim. Now, we can't think of them as a victim as if they come to America, we pay extra taxes, they come and somebody blows themselves up and a bunch of people with them. We can't think like that. The way Trump's doing it is he's protected the identity of a Muslim. He's made it still possible for a Muslim to come to the U.S. and that they are thought of highly. Now, I'm sort of getting off track here, but what I'm trying to say is that the best way to do it is slowly, so that in the future, immigration is looked greatly upon. So back in the day, immigration from Ireland and Italy, everyone loved it. Now, in the short term, they didn't like it. In the long term,
in retrospect, but back then, yeah, absolutely not.
I want my great grandchildren to look on this and think that immigration was a good thing. Right. I don't want them to go back and look on it and be like, that was the worst thing America's ever done. By making it a temporary ban and looking at it objectively, Trump is protecting that idea.
Okay, I mean, see, here's where I take issue, because the whole idea of this being a something we have to take very slowly because it's a matter of national security is complete BS, honestly. I mean, the vetting process for refugees and even visa applicants is already insane. The average process is somewhere between 12 and I think 18 months. It is incredibly arduous. It is very difficult to get through. In fact, my old roommate, who was from Pakistan, said one of his friends who had a financial job, it might have been in Boston or New York, I don't remember, had a financial job lined up. And so she applied for a visa. She was rejected the visa because her dad died the previous year, and they thought that because she was so ready to leave a year after her father's death, that she did not have enough ties to her home country of Pakistan, and therefore should not have the privilege of going abroad.
Okay, that's despicable. No one can disagree with that.
Right, and of course this is an anecdote, but what I'm trying to get at is the process of vetting is incredibly, incredibly hard to get through. Right? No one from ISIS wants to do it. The more effective thing for ISIS to do is to convince homebound U.S. citizens from doing it. And we've seen there have been plenty of attacks in the past, right? San Bernardino, the Orlando Pulse nightclub shooting, Boston,
where it's homegrown,
right? And they're all U.S. They're homegrown. A lot of them U.S. citizens. So the idea that you're protecting the country by this grievous violation of human rights it's totally wrong. In fact, there is this one study that let's see if I can get this right from UNC Chapel Hill. That showed, and it was recent, I believe in 2016, maybe 17, that only 46 Muslim Americans were linked to violent extremism at home or abroad in 2016. The total Muslim population is 3.3 million in the States. Of all of those, only 54 lives were lost, and 49 of them came from the Orlando nightclub Pulse shooting, right? So, one terrorist attack led to 49. The rest of the 5 lives lost in the previous year were from all Muslim terrorism put together. And these are U.S. citizens as well. So these are not U.S. citizens. The idea that we're somehow saving thousands or millions of lives by trying to really hunker down on potential terrorism is complete BS. I mean, while the statistic quote in the media that there's been 0 attacks from immigrants or refugees,
that's false.
That's wrong. There was in September of 2016, a Somali man from Somalia, which is a country banned by the Trump executive order, knifed 10 people in Minnesota. So there's been attacks. There's been successful attacks. And the thing that the media is not paying attention to is how many potential failed or what's the word I'm looking for? Attacks that were foiled by the police or the U.S. government. Okay. We're not looking at that number. So while there are definitely risks, it's the amount of lives on the line is somewhere, it's a couple dozen.
My end perspective on the whole thing is that it's better to be open and let people in than not to. I think that I agree with you on this idea that the media has sort of completely blown it out of proportion. I do think that no Americans' lives should be lost from immigration. I think that should be a fact, and that immigration should not lead to the loss of an American.
No, listen, it's a disproportionate response. You are because this is an indefinite ban on Syrian refugees, right? The other ones are, I think, 90-day bans on the other 6 countries. It's an indefinite ban on the country that needs help the most, because your justification is that these individuals could potentially kill multiple American lives. And while I get you should not tolerate a single life lost. I mean, if you're talking about from a moral perspective, I don't think you can justify letting thousands or even tens of thousands, maybe even millions, or definitely millions of lives in Syria to be lost because you want to protect 10 American lives, potentially, right?
Okay.
So what if you want to focus on national security, you want to focus on protecting U.S. citizens' lives, you focus on domestic terrorism, you focus on gun violence. Gun violence has somewhere of like, what is it? For every one death from terrorism, a U.S. citizen death from terrorism, there's 1,000+ deaths from firearms. Are you kidding me? And you want to focus on the terrorism? You want to use the fear-mongering to divide the country, to vilify the other, and to allow millions of refugees to die in the process, all because you think the risk of, 10 American lives being lost every year is far more important than saving the millions of others who desperately need it? I don't think that you have a case for national security.
I do see where you're coming from. I can get on board with all of that. That the first week of Trump's campaign, the focus shouldn't have been banning 7 countries from immigrating to the U.S. or even visiting the U.S. It was a travel ban too. Now, tomorrow we're going to do this same sort of podcast, but we're going to focus more on solutions. We've complained a lot here. We're going to focus on some solutions tomorrow. So stay tuned for that. If you guys want to catch up with us on any social media, the link's in the description down below if you want to go follow Christian. I think it's at Seagons908.
Yes.
Okay. And Opinion Overhaul, you just look that up on any Google search engine or SoundCloud, YouTube, whatever, you'll find it. Thanks you guys for watching. Thanks, Christian, for joining us today. It's always a pleasure. And see you guys tomorrow.
Bye.